After we beat his shadow, we confront Mitsuo about the murders. He confesses to the murders when we ask him about them, and we bring him back to the real world. After we give him a piece of our mind, we call the police, who take him into custody. When the police take him away, we all sit down at the food court of JohneAwesome and come to the bitter realization that this might be it after all. The investigation is over and everything will become peaceful again. We start talking about how far we've all come and the hardships we faced along the way. We talk about each other's shadow worlds and what it was like for each other. Yosuke brings up the point that the main character did not have a shadow. Well, that's because we're the main character, and the main character is a blank slate that was intended for the player to fill up until the anime, manga, and Aria games came out, which gave the character a predetermined personality, which is now associated with our character, rendering him less of a blank slate and more of a silent hero who only speaks when spoken to, which can be very disheartening for fans like me. Anyway, we spend the rest of our summer as friends and enjoy great character development, such as Summer Festival, where Teddy steals all the girls for himself, the obligatory trip to the beach episode, and one last hurrah for the end of summer. Back at school, we learn about a school trip to Gekkoukan High School at Tatsumi Port Island, the place where Persona 3 took place. Later at Tatsumi Port Island, we stand outside of the high school where we reintroduce to Chidori from Persona 3, who is our tour guide. At school, we learn the legend of Izanagi and Izanami. In the old fable, Izanagi and Izanami created all of Japan and the people who live there. One day, Izanami gave birth to their child, Hino Katsugushi, who was a fire god that was so hot that it killed Izanami during childbirth. Izanagi was so horribly distraught over his loss that he starts to head into the underworld to save her. Similar to the legend of Orpheus and his wife, the only condition is while bringing her back, they are not allowed to turn around and look at her. But Izanagi fell into the temptation to see his wife again. When he looked upon her face, he saw the husk of a being that barely resembles his wife. Embarrassed and ashamed of this, Izanami becomes enraged with her husband and starts to chase him. He leaves the underworld and is able to seal the entrance, keeping Izanami at bay. Determined to get her revenge somehow, she declares that she will kill 1,000 of his men every day. But in retort, Izanagi claims that he will give birth to 1,500 more. Will this information be ever brought up again? Once again, probably not. Later that night, after taking a tour of Tatsumi Port Island, we end up at Club Escapade at Palawana Mall. We head in and meet Naoto of all people and ask him to hang out with us. We convince him to agree and go into the VIP area due to Risei's celebrity status. We play a game known as the King's Game. Many teenagers engage in such petty games such as Spin the Bottle, 7 Minutes in Heaven, Bloody Knuckles, and various other bland rituals of social engagement. But you see, there exists one game to truly test your body's limits and courage. This game is none other than the King's Game. A game where a group of people draw long objects such as chopsticks or straws, each with numbers and one of them with a marking. Whoever draws the marked object becomes king, and the king gets to call out a number and an act. Whoever has the object with the called out number must perform the king's ruling, as the king is absolute. And that goes over just as great as you could imagine. Somehow, Risei and Yukiko end up being drunk, even though the drinks don't contain any alcohol. Somehow. Naoto decides to ask us what we know about the case, and Yukiko and Risei end up spilling the beans, but of course the concept of personas and shadows is too far-fetched for Naoto, and he decides to leave. A few days later, on a rainy day, we decide to check the Midnight Channel. Could someone appear on the TV since the killer has been captured? To our surprise, a silhouette appears on the television. Yosuke calls us and asks if there really will be another victim since the murderer was captured. The next night, we decide to check the TV to see if anything else appears, and sure enough, something does. It appears that Naoto is in some lab getup, and he starts talking about some weird sciencey stuff, and appears to be imitating a mad scientist.
It's so cool, son of a bitch!
Kanji calls us and tells us that we need to meet up with them tomorrow to discuss the issue at hand. We go to JohneAwesome and talk about various things, such as how could he have been kidnapped if the killer has been caught, and we need to save him, so we get the information we need to find him. After we get a hold of his trail, we get to his dungeon, which is an underground lab of sorts. We head in and try to save him, and at the end of his dungeon we catch up with him where he's surprisingly calm and talking to his shadow. He sees us and seems somewhat relieved as he's ready to leave. But as he does, his shadow starts to cry like a child. Naoto gets irritated, and after listening to their argument, we learn that Naoto is actually a girl? She wishes to be seen as an adult so people will take her seriously. The only reason why she acted was a boy is so that she could get a little bit more trust from the detectives and police officers. Naoto says none of that is true, which prompts her shadow into turning more of a powerful robot-looking shadow. After we beat her shadow, Naoto accepts it. She realizes that she must accept herself as a woman, and she can still do the things she strives to do regardless of that. Afterward, she gains her persona, Sakuna Hikuna. She realizes that this case was far beyond from what she knew, and that it is far from over. It has become obvious that Mitsuo isn't the real murderer after all, and the real one is still at large. After we return to the real world, we take Naoto back home, and we return to the Dojima residence where Dojima and Adachi are celebrating the return of Naoto. After some suspicion, Dojima retires to bed and leaves us be. A few days later, Naoto tells us the same thing that we've heard from everyone else. She heard the doorbell and opened it and got knocked out. But she wasn't entirely knocked out. She was able to tell due to the build of the person it was a man, and since she didn't hear any conversations, it must have been a lone culprit. She then felt a single impact, which must have been the TV, and the whole act was done in a few minutes. Naoto tells us that Mitsuo's actions were far too different to be the real murderer, and in fact that his only victim was King Moron. The act was just a copycat killing, probably to give himself the attention he so desperately wanted. After hearing all of this, we gladly take Naoto into our team because we're the only ones who can solve this case. A little later, it seems that the fog from the other world is starting to leak into the real world, which is very concerning. Panic starts to spread throughout the people of Inaba, claiming that it's deadly. One night on the news, we see reporters asking children about this situation, including Nanako herself. A little later after that, we return home to see that no one is home, even Nanako, which is a little odd. But as we start to worry, Nanako comes through the front door to greet us and hands us a letter addressed to us. It says, "Don't rescue anyone." A few days later, some more important character development happens at the school festival. This is around the time PQ happens, so once I have a video for that out, I'll put an annotation here.
Great how we make each other on this wild and crazy carousel of life. Any cool how it changed the path of our lives, set us off a new adventure. This carousel takes us round and round. This labyrinth of life, you can't tell up from down. So much fun. We forgot to check when this crossroads taking us. But hey, here we come. This carousel spins us round so much. Sometimes you don't know should you stay or get off. It's only just begun. Welcome to this wide maze of life.
A few days later, we tune into the Midnight Channel to see a silhouette of what appears to be a small figure, but the image is too blurry to make out who it is. We discuss it with the group and show them the letter we received in the mail a few days ago. This raises many alarms for everyone since the murderer knows our addresses and may intend to do harm. We decide we must act soon before it's too late. Late that night at home, Dojima tells us that we received a note in the mail. He cautiously hands it over to us and stands over our shoulder as we slowly open the envelope. Only a single sentence appears on the letter saying, "If you don't stop, someone close will be killed." This obviously catches Dojima's attention. Dojima angrily acknowledges he knew something was up about this and interrogates us right in his living room. He demands answers on how we are involved with the case. We try to tell him an excuse, but obviously Dojima isn't buying it, and he takes us to the police station. At the police station, he confiscates our phone and asks us again what our relationship with the case is. We crack and tell him everything, including personas and entering the TV. Clearly, Dojima doesn't believe us and takes it as an insult to their family bond and trust. He leaves us in the room with anger, and Adachi tries to comfort us, telling us that he just cares about our well-being. At Junes, we see Yosuke and Teddy lollygagging at work. Teddy tries to call our cell, but of course, we can't answer. Teddy starts to worry about Nanako and asks if we can visit her for dinner. Yosuke agrees, but he decides to call the home phone to the Dojimas. Nanako picks up and tells Yosuke everything, and in a frantic hurry they head to the Dojima residence. Meanwhile, at the police station, it strikes midnight, and we decide to check the midnight channel in the interrogation room. We see a small figure who looks like she's in grade school. We suddenly realize it's Nanako. But we can't let anyone know since Dojima took our phone. Our friends rush to the Dojima household to find Nanako has been kidnapped. Yosuke, Kanji, and Teddy decide to run to the police station to let us know that Nanako has been kidnapped. Dojima overhears this and answers the phone to Naoto to confirm this. Both Dojima and Adachi, with a look of disbelief on their faces, feel hopeless. He tries to get checkpoints and roadblocks set up, but the other cops are taking Dojima's claims with a grain of salt since they believe that they already caught the murderer. Dojima stresses out and decides to run ahead to find Nanako. The rest of our friends bust into the room a little later and try to explain the situation to Adachi, who is keeping watch on us. We discuss that the murderer must have taken her in a large vehicle to hold a large enough TV in. We come to the conclusion that it was a delivery truck, and Adachi remembers that there had been an odd delivery truck seen around town. We decide that there's no time to waste and we hurry up and try to find Dojima and the murderer. We see Dojima pursue the delivery truck in his car. Due to the heavy rain, they spin out of control, resulting in a crash. We arrive on the scene to find Dojima injured and the suspect escaped with Nanako. Naoto checks the back of the truck and confirms the theory that there is a TV in the back, and he pushes people into it. After he's taken to the hospital, Dojima asks us to do whatever we can to bring Nanako back. We head into the TV and find Nanako's location, which results in us being in her dungeon, Heaven. Heaven can be seen as her way of trying to connect with her mother again. We decide that there's no time to waste and hurry in. Every floor feels like an eternity for our heroes as we hear Nanako's cries for help and fight endless hordes of shadows. We reach the top to find Nanako being choke-held by the murderer. It appears the murderer is none other than Namatame, the politician who had an affair with the first victim. We try talking some sense into Namatame, but he seems to feel like he has some sort of messiah complex. He tells us that his actions are justified because he is trying to save the victims, not murder them. We tell him that he is far from a messiah, and he strengthens his grip on Nanako. And after incapacitating Nanako, he gets consumed by numerous shadows and becomes the deity, Kunino Sagiri. After a long and grueling battle, Namatame falls to the ground in defeat. We hurry to bring her and Namatame to the hospital in the real world where the police are. Outside of Nanako's room, we all feel down and wish there was something we could do to prevent all of this. Adachi comes up to us and tells us that they don't know what's wrong with her just yet. Before we leave, we head into Dojima's room where Adachi is and deliver him the news of Nanako. After a few days, Nanako and Dojima both appear to be getting slightly better. We decide to buy them gifts for when they get better. But while at Junes, Adachi calls and tells us that Nanako's condition is getting urgent. We all head to Nanako's hospital room with Dojima to see what's wrong. The doctors ask us to step outside of her room and Dojima to go back to his. Outside of her room, we impatiently wait for anything. Yosuke gets angry and blames Teddy in his world for doing this to her, and Teddy takes it pretty seriously. Adachi comes up to deliver us some bad news. He says it'll be nigh impossible to convict Namatame, and he will more than likely get off scot-free. Kanji points out to Adachi that he's rather calm about all of this, but he tells us that he's just the messenger. Suddenly we're all called to Nanako's room. Nanako has seemed to worsen. She asks for her dad and we tell her that he will be there soon. Nanako starts to lose her grip on life. Doctors try to desperately keep her alive. The doctors leave to hurry to get Dojima and we comfort Nanako. She musters up the words to tell us that she's scared. But before Dojima can make it, it's too late. Nanako passes on. Dojima makes it to the room, including your friends. They're all distraught at her death. After her death, we all leave the room. Adachi comes up to us and asks what's wrong since he just passed Dojima. Adachi realizes what just happened and noticed that Dojima is going towards Namatame's room. In Nanako's room, we see Teddy mourning over the death of Nanako, and he says he wishes he could have done something more. Back in front of Namatame's room, Dojima was stopped by the guards and they escort him back to his room. This gives us the opportunity to confront Namatame. We hear a bump in his room and we hurry in. We see that he's trying to escape through the window. We confront Namatame and start to let our emotions get ahead of ourselves instead of listening to what he has to say. Suddenly, the Midnight Channel activates in his room and his shadow self shows himself, since Namatame never faced his shadow. His shadow claims that they could have saved her if we didn't get in their way. We obviously know this isn't the case. Kanji threatens Namatame's life, and his shadow exits on to do something to him. He says that he knows we won't do anything to him because of our moral code, and he says that he will just continue saving people. The TV turns off and we are left to decide what to do with him. Yosuke and Kanji both want to push him into the TV, a fitting end for him. But deep down, we know there's something. Yosuke asks us if we have any objections to throwing him in. We know something isn't right, so we say that there's something else to this all. Yosuke seems peeved off and reminds us what he has done and why we need to stop him. We say that we're missing something. As Yosuke gets to his breaking point, we tell him to calm down. We decide to take a deep breath and decide that there must be more to this. We all agree that we must come back at a later time when he is more mentally stable to answer questions. Back in Nanako's room, we see that Nanako somehow has miraculously come back to life. Everybody is overjoyed to the point of tears, and the doctor says that he will let Dojima know as soon as possible. Outside we try to reach Teddy, but to no avail. Suddenly it starts to snow, and we decide to head home. Later that night we're summoned to the Velvet Room where Igor asks us if we're confident that we can solve this case. He has us reflect on our journey thus far and returns us to our sleep, wishing us the best of luck. The next day we get into his room by tricking the guards and start asking him questions. He reveals to us that after his affair ended, his career ended as well. He returned home where he felt terrible about everything. Since he couldn't make contact with Yamano directly, he decided to try out the urban legend he heard about at the Midnight Channel. He wasn't expecting anything at first, but then the Midnight Channel activated and he saw Yamano. He said it looked like she was trying to call out for help, so he tried to reach into the TV to help her, and he stuck his arm into the TV. Later, after Yamano dies, he watched the Midnight Channel again and sees Saki Konishi on the TV. He learns about the death of her soon afterwards and starts to think that the TV is a sign from Yamano of people who are about to die. He starts to think that he could put people into the TV until they would no longer appear on the Midnight Channel so they could remain safe. Then he intended to bring them out afterwards and let them be free and safe. He was inclined to believe it was working too, since he saw Yukiko, Kanji, Rise, and Naoto all return safe and happy. We apologize to each other for the misunderstandings, and before we can ask anything more, guards come in and escort us out. The next day we head to a ramen shop with our friends to discuss the case further. We all feel stumped. It appears that we've hit a roadblock and can't go any further. Us, Yosuke, and Naoto decide to step outside in the snow to reflect on the journey thus far, as the snowflakes gently drift in the air. Who has known most about this case? Who seems to be around every corner? Who could easily cover their tracks? It couldn't be. Could it? We let Naoto and Yosuke know who we think the culprit is, and we head inside to let everyone else know. We hurry to the hospital to let Dojima know and to stop him. We run into Adachi and he asks us what we're doing there. Dojima comes up behind Adachi and starts asking him where Namatame is. Adachi tells him that he's been relocated. Dojima brings up that his alibi is solid and that his motivation for murdering those people was almost non-existent. Adachi, with a clear look of distress on his face, tells Dojima that he's acting too much on his detective's intuition. Dojima asks Adachi what the deal is. He seems to never have taken this job this seriously before. Dojima then asks us what we're doing there. We tell him we have to confirm something with Adachi. We start questioning him further about Miss Yamano and Saki Konishi. Adachi starts to get shaky, and his responses become more rigid. Adachi tries to wiggle himself out of the situation and says he has to report to the station. Naoto stops him.
Just one more thing, please. We know for certain now that the first two murders weren't Namatame's doing. Someone else killed them. Adachi-san, do you have any idea who that might be?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
'Cause we think it might have been you.
What? That's ridiculous! We already know Namatame's the one who put them all in!
What did you just say?
And with that, Adachi seals his fate. He is the real murderer. He has been pulling the strings this entire time. We started pushing for a confession since we have evidence against him. He hurries into Namatame's room and we pursue him. We look around everywhere and he's nowhere to be seen. Dojima limps into the room feeling hopeless that one of his only friends betrayed him like this. We decide to split up for today and come back together tomorrow. That night we find ourselves in the Velvet Room, but neither Igor, Margaret, or Marie are in the room. The only one there is Teddy. Teddy tells us that he's glad to see us again, but still feels like he failed Nanako. We tell him Nanako pulled through and he's happy and says that he misses us all. The next day, Teddy resurfaces in the real world and we take him in with open arms. We go to the JohneAwesome and head into the TV. In the TV, we are able to track down Adachi and we end up in the apartment room from our first encounter of the TV world. There stands Adachi with a look on his face that we haven't seen quite before. We confront him about the murders and he says that they were both just accidents. He outright says that it wouldn't have happened if Miss Yamano and the high school girl didn't struggle so hard. This proves that he also murdered Saki Konishi. We ask him if he tricked Namatame into pushing people in the TV, and we see a flashback where Namatame calls the police. Adachi picks up the phone, and Namatame tells Adachi about the first two cases and about the Midnight Channel. Adachi says that there's no way the police would believe in a story like that. But Adachi hints that maybe he should save them. He might be able to put them somewhere where no one can find them. Namatame remembers about the TV world and how he could enter it. He tries to defend himself by saying he didn't technically murder the suspects, and that Namatame did most of the kidnapping. We tell him that he's just dodging the blame, and he chuckles and says that no one could ever convince him because the story is such bullshit. He tells us that Mitsuo's disappearance was also his doing. He pushed Mitsuo into the TV for the fun of it. Rise is able to notice that they weren't facing the real Adachi, and the real Adachi is somewhere else. I did not explicitly cover it in this video, but if you choose to do Adachi's social link but not finish it, we decide later that night that we'll go into the TV by ourselves. We enter the room and we see the door disappear. We hear Adachi's voice and turn around to find him behind us with a gun pointed to our head. We tell him that we believe in him and he says that the Adachi we bonded with was just a fragment in our heads. And sure enough, Adachi does shoot his gun but seemingly misses on purpose. He tells us that we're done talking and that he needs to leave. The next day we return as a group and enter Adachi's twisted version of Inaba. After we battle our way through his floors, we finally reach him. We confront him again about the murders, and he tells us that it was the world as it is that killed them. He keeps trying to convince us that things will get better if we just become shadows. We aren't having any of what he's saying, and then that makes him go berserk and turn into a shadow version of himself. We engage Adachi in battle, and he shows his much improved strength. He also summons his very own version of Izanagi, Magatsu Izanagi, a dark reflection of ours. After a long and tedious battle, Adachi is seemingly defeated and falls to the ground. Adachi turns entirely dark and becomes possessed by a dark entity. He starts telling us that it is his duty to merge the two worlds together and turn everyone into shadows. He is also responsible for the fog in Inaba. He reveals himself to be Amano Sigiri, a similar deity to the one that Namatame turned into. After we defeat him, he is impressed by our power. He says we have shown him the true willpower of humans, and he will lift the fog in Inaba. He then glosses over how he granted us our powers since we could brave the hollow forest. He then dissolves into thin air and spits Adachi back out. We approach Adachi, who is utterly defeated. He tells us that if we truly believe that we can change the world, then we should just go on right ahead. Adachi tells us that we should just leave him right there to die by the shadows. We tell him we won't let him off that easy. And with no sign of resistance, he accepts that he will face the law. He then musters up a little smile and we can tell his sincerity about being sorry. We bring him back to the real world to be placed in police custody. Next day we celebrate with the Dojima since they could leave the hospital for a day enjoying New Year's evening. After the Dojimas return to the hospital, we spend some time together as friends and we decide to go on a skiing trip so we can truly, finally, relax. The next time we go to the Velvet Room, we see Marie is missing. This only happens if you completed Marie's social link. I'm going to be mostly talking about choosing Marie as your lover since I feel it's the closest to canon in my eye, so any reference to Marie will be due to her being our lover. I should probably give you some insight onto her social link. Sorry if this feels like it's completely throwing off the pacing, but social links in these games are meant to be taken at the player's pace, so there's no real definite way to place them in the story's continuity. So basically, Marie's social link is helping her remember who she is and how to become more human since she starts out little to know about the real world and her. We help her become friends with our friends and let her experience things in the real world. At the same time, we slowly try to piece her memory together with each progressing link. One key clue to our identity is a bamboo comb that she has. We don't find out much about it besides learning that it matches the description of an old one from old Shinto legends. But at the end of her social link, we help her understand true friendship, and you can choose to stay as friends or romantically get involved. Like I said, I'm choosing the latter because I feel like it's more canon in my eye, but that's not trying to say that like you can't choose anybody else. But just for the story and how things work, I'm just going to say that she's the canon lover. Anyway, Margaret tells us that she's missing, and she may be able to help us find her. She asks us if we want her to find her. We tell her yes, and she tells us that she will let us know once she finds anything else out. Seeing as we know nothing about her disappearance, we can't really do anything about it right now, but we hold genuine concern about her whereabouts. All we can do now is wait for what Margaret has to come up with. A few weeks later, we go on the skiing trip. We teach each other how to ski, we tell scary stories, and we feel unconstrained by the case any longer. One day after skiing, we decide to split up into groups since we can't remember where the cabin is. We split up between boys and girls. On our way where we hope the cabin is, we stumble on an old work shed. Seeing as the sun is falling and the cold is rising, we have to take shelter in there until we get some help. But just our luck, Kanji and Teddy forget their phone. Yosuke's phone is dead, and our phone doesn't have any service. It appears we have to hide in the cabin until sunrise, or if someone else saves us. Just as the fleeting thought of raiding Teddy's safe space and ruining his innocence, as he liked to put it, we hear something turn on. Surprisingly, the girls come in rather alarmed at the warmth-causing motives that may be lying within the cabin. We ask them what they're doing in there, and they tell us that we're in the shack right behind the cabin. After making that dreadful realization, they ask us what's wrong with it, and we decide to take a look. As we approach the TV, a hand comes out and grabs us with inhuman strength and pulls us in. We wake up in a bamboo forest that appears to be straight out of an old Shinto fable. A woman approaches us, and that woman is none other than Margaret. After our introduction, she explains why she brought us here. She tells us that this is where Marie is, the Hollow Forest. This is the place created by her fragmented mind. She tells us that she had shut herself in here. After fighting our way through her dungeon, we finally reach the heart of it all. A giant dome surrounded by giant statues. We quickly head in to see her, but all dressed in a weird robe of some sorts. She asks us why we pursued her. We tell her we are trying to save her, but she tells us it's pointless. She is a deadly deity, much like the other two we fought. She sealed herself in here so that she could die, not make the world disappear. She says that her memory came back to her and her only purpose of being was of non-existence. She tells us to leave so that she can just die on her own, but we refuse and we tell her that we won't let her make the world disappear and we will save her from her destiny. She starts to attack us and shows that she means business, but unfortunately, so do we. She breaks down asking us why we want this to happen. We tell her it's because we care for her. We care too much about her to let her go like this. She finally sees that we may be able to help her. If we defeat the monster within her while she puts her mind to rest, she should be safe, but she's not entirely sure about her body. We all decide to take the risk if there's any chance to save her. After the battle, the Marie we all know and love bursts free from the beast and falls. Before she can hit the ground, we catch her. But to all of our shock, she isn't responding. As we all begin to lose hope, she starts to wake up and tells Teddy, who's crying on her, to get off. We all give our sighs of relief that she's okay. Marie shyly looks away from us with a gentle smile and blush. She then embraces us as we share a romantic moment. Rise gets jealous and tells her to let go, but Marie tells her nope. We all share a laugh, but suddenly the hidden forest starts to collapse. We all hurry out of the TV world and return to the real world. As we all rejoice of our victory and the gaining of a true friend, we leave the shack. On our way out, Marie pulls us aside and tells us that while she was put to sleep in her mind, she heard a voice telling her that humans don't really know what they truly desire. We ask her who it was, and she says she doesn't know for certain, but the voice sounded familiar. She tells us it probably wasn't anything, and says that she hopes everything can finally go back to normal now that the fog is truly gone. We shrug it off, and our friends have a snowball fight and enjoy the rest of our day. The next day is Valentine's Day, and we spend it with various friends, but there's a small lingering thought in the back of our heads. It's almost time for us to go home. This depressing thought seemingly locked itself away in our minds, but we decide to not let it ruin our day, and we just continue to enjoy it. On our way home, we see Marie standing in the street. After throwing some cute exchanges back and forth, she hands us a gift. She says it's some chocolates, and it appears she made it herself, but it smells and it's moving. She says she didn't have any electric outlets in the velvet room, and she apologizes about it. We tell her thank you, and she expects us to eat it. In her own words, if we don't eat it, it'll melt and run away. It looks like we have no escape, so we eat the chocolate, and much to our surprise, it actually tasted rather phenomenal. She starts to blush and tells us to close our eyes. She tells us that she'll never forget us, and we spend the rest of the afternoon. The next day on our way to school, Chie, Yukiko, and Yosuke talk about how spring's almost here, which is when we return home. We decide to make the best of what time we have left, and we head into the school. The coming weeks come and go until it's the day before we leave. We spend that morning with the Dojimas, and Nanako gives us a letter of some sort. We share breakfast and enjoy our time together. Dojima tells us to go and talk to our friends one last time before we leave. He says he'll take care of Nanako. After saying goodbye to all the friends we made on this journey, Dojima takes us to the park and tells us how much him and Nanako will miss us. Before we head to the Dojima residence, we decide to go to Junes, and we're surprised to see everyone else is there. We share our stories and feelings about the times we spent together. But we feel this gut feeling, like we're still missing something about the case. We discuss about what Amano Sagiri told us, about how he granted us these powers. But Chie brings up how we had the ability to stick our hands on the TV before any of that have happened, including Adachi and Namatame. Everyone seems so confused on how all of that could have happened. We were so special that we were granted the ability before anyone else? We remember that letter that Nanako handed us this morning, and we open and read it.
Huh? This is from jail? It's from Adachi.
I'm sure you're surprised to get this letter out of the blue. I'm writing this because there's something I need to tell you. Ever since I made it out alive, there are some things I understand now. It's true that my game's over. As you all insisted at the time, I'll abide by the rules of this world. But as long as I'm in stir here, I can't clean up after myself. So I hope this will give you something to think about regarding this case. There's still this feeling I can't shake. It's about how it all started, about that midnight channel. Now I remember, someone told me about it when I first came to town, before I heard the rumors at the station. And I was intrigued when I noticed that something similar was written on Namatame's reports as well. But I can't remember who it was that told me. Since Namatame and I both gained our power after coming to Inaba, I have a feeling that has something to do with it. I don't know if any of this will be useful or not, but I hope it can help somehow. When I'm here, I think of Dojima-san, Nanako-chan, and you. A lot. Though my time with you didn't seem like much fun before. It's strange. Despite it all, I'm grateful to you. Thank you. But let me just say this. You're a dumbass. You take the path you choose, and I'll think about what that means to me, too. I doubt I'll ever see you again, but stay healthy. Goodbye.
After reading his heartwarming letter to us, we stop and ponder how Adachi and Namatame only got their powers after visiting Iniba. Chie mentions that it could have been the person who mentioned the Midnight Channel to Adachi and Namatame. Maybe they were behind this all. Chie was the one who told us the rumor, and we know for sure it wasn't her. It had to have been someone else they talked to pretty early here in their time in Iniba. We then realize there is something similar that has happened to us. We meet up with Dojima and ask him about what happened. When we arrived in town, he tries to illustrate to us what happened the best he could. Next, we decide to check the Velvet Room. Igor asks us what's wrong. We solved the case and have brought peace to the town. But we tell him that there's something else that we haven't fulfilled. He feels rather intrigued by this and decides to help us one last time. He summons all of the powers of truth and fragments before our very eyes. He shapes them into a crystal that is made up of the bonds that we made during our journey. It dispels lies and only brings the truth. Before we leave, Marie brings up how she was created to protect humanity and fulfill their collective wish. But as time went on, humans started to wish for death, and soon she couldn't fulfill both of her duties. And one day, the desires of humans became too strong and she split into two different existences. When that happened, she was left with no memories or powers, and she became a tiny piece of this greater puzzle, and she couldn't stop the fog without killing herself. She was just a simple tool to be used by her other half. But she tells us that she believes in us and that we can stop her other half and find the truth we have to obtain. Igor chuckles and tells us that miraculously we have found our journey's true end. With this newfound power, we leave the Velvet Room to find it raining. As we walk down the road, we see a figure standing there. This figure is none other than the gas station attendant we greeted on our way when we arrived into town. We approached him and he asks us if he can help us. We ask him about Adachi and Namatame. He just kind of shrugs it off like any other common citizen. We ask him if he's ever met them before. After a brief silence, he tells us it's a weird question to ask, but he may have seen them before. Once again, he tries to play it off. He hastily then asks to be left be. We press him further. We ask again if he knows anything about them. After another brief silence, he says he did greet them when they first came into town. He then chuckles and asks what all the questions are for. We ask him another question. What did he do to us? And he says all he did was just greet us like the other two. He then asks why we're asking so many questions. Something bothering us? We ask him if he gave us the power. After yet another brief silence, he starts to laugh maniacally. He says that he is impressed that we have found him out, and that he's been waiting for us to find him. He reveals that it was in fact him that awakened the power in all three of us. He notices the comb that we got from Marie from her social link, and he says that it's a sign of their separation. We ask him who he truly is, and he reveals his true form. He wasn't actually a boy, but rather a girl. Not just any girl. The yin to our yang. She is the embodiment of everything we are against. The being that our true self has been battling for a millennium. None other than Izanami, the goddess who swore her vengeance against our true self, Izanagi. She tells us that she cannot ignore us any longer, and we have come too far for her plan. She gives us a chance to regroup with our friends and to try to stop her. We meet up with everybody and explain the situation the best we can and head inside of the TV. Rise picks up on a powerful signal and we head towards it. After we reach her dungeon, Yomotsu Hirosaka, we battle through it, in which appears to be the same place from our dream from the beginning of our journey. We reach Izanami and she congratulates us on making it this far. She tells us that this is where all of humanity's hearts gather to show their desires. She tells us that the Midnight Channel was there to feed humanity's desire of curiosity. We tell her that if this is the reality we truly wanted to live in, then we wouldn't have pursued her this far. After we all let our hearts and feelings out, we agree that this is the send-off we needed. Izanami grows into a more powerful form and we engage her in battle. She tries convincing us that the knowledge of the truth is not everything, but we don't listen to any of her petty words. We seemingly can't do any damage to her, but we remember what Igor gave to us. The Orb of Sight, which reveals Izanami's true form. We see the form that Izanami was reduced down to in the underworld, a massive, grotesque beast. We continue to battle her and we feel like we're actually doing damage. But soon she uses her true power, 1,000 curses. The curse she swore against Izanagi all those years ago, where she said she would kill 1,000 of his men. She continuously uses it on us, but each one of our friends sacrifices themselves in our stead, until none of them are left. She finally directly uses the power on us, and we wake up in a foggy area. Are we dead? Are we still alive? We aren't sure until Margaret comes up to us. She tells us not to give up hope and shows us the encouraging words of all of our friends we made on our journey. It is then that we remember. All those years ago when Izanami made that curse on our true selves, we made a promise in her stead. We get up to much of Izanami's surprise. She tries killing us again with her curse, but to no avail. She is shocked how the will of the few can change the will of the many. She continuously tries to kill us, but with different abilities. We withstand everything she throws at us. She seemingly gets nervous and asks how our power can rival hers. Finally, after one last try, we awaken our true power. The promise we made aeons ago. When she said she would kill 1,000 of our men a day, we said we'd make 1,500 more in her spite. Those 1,500 men were our myriad truths. We throw our glasses off and summon our truest form, Izanagi no Okami. Obliterates Izanami with all of our friends arising as well. She staggers to stay up and asks the question why is she the one to disappear. She sees that her plan can no longer go into fruition and tells us that we can live our lives the way we want. She sees that if we have the power to erase her existence, then we have what it takes to live on our own. Izanami seemingly disappears and we are left with the decision we made. After she disappears, we all breathe a sigh of relief and are excited to start all over again without any of these predicaments anymore. As we leave, we find ourselves in the Velvet Room where we see a faded Marie. She tells us welcome back and tells us everything is over. She tells us that we're incredible and she's no match for us. She reflects on how we beat both of her halves and the Sagiri, which were a part of her all along. She thanks us for saving her back at the Hollow Forest and says that all of her parts have come back to her. She says her true name now is Izanami no Mikoto. She is the fertile will that will protect the world and every being that lives on it. She says she'll never forget us, and she tells us to never forget her. She disappears and Igor suddenly appears with Margaret and he chuckles. He says that we have driven back a godly being and brought around a new world. He says this will be the last time we'll be summoned there, even though it's really not. And he says we fulfilled our contract and reached our destination. He tells us to go forth and see the new world within our own eyes. We awaken in the beautiful meadow with our friends and just enjoy the view. The next day, we find ourselves at the Inaba train station, somehow, where we tell all of our friends goodbye. After we exchange our bittersweet goodbyes, we promise to see each other again. And after one last glance at Inaba, we board the train. The train leaves the station and we see our friends running alongside the train and telling us some final words. We lifted the fog in the world and in ourselves. Whether or not this brings us happiness or despair has yet to be seen. The fog is at bay and the world has now become clear as the truth. The last year we spent in Inaba was one of the best we've ever had. Even though there was so much treachery and mystery behind every corner, we found what mattered most, the friends we made and the bonds we shared. As we watch the countryside slowly fade out of view, we cherish those memories we shared with everyone, and look forward to the world we helped establish to protect. Things can go back to normal. For a while.
It's a wrong road. Echo when they're getting newborns. Body's stronger. The father on from where my head is at. Oh, what my heart is saying. Break out of the dawn. It's time to take a step up, no more cruising alone. Break out of the shell. Deep down inside you feel like flying a high. No need to fear. It's time you found that dream.
This isn't the end, however. A year after the events of Persona 4 and a little after the events of Persona 4 Arena and Ultimax, we return to Inaba. As we leave the train station, we see Namatame trying to pick his career back up and starting a rally. We head to the Dojima residence where we try to call Dojima, but he says that he forgot we were coming today, so we have to wait until he's back to unlock the house. He says to go hang out with our friends for a little bit while we wait. We try to call all of our friends, but they also say they're busy. We go to Junes, where all of our friends actually surprise us. It's been so long and they all look so vastly different. We all laugh about how crazy things were back in June, and how things have gotten so much better. Dojima calls and asks us how the surprise went, and we told him we were pretty surprised about it. We all go to Dojima's house to celebrate our return. As we eat, we ask Dojima about last year's case, and he tells us that Namatame was released due to lack of evidence and the inability to replicate his motives. He also said that Adachi confessed to his crimes, but he wasn't the one who interrogated him because they were too close. They were also able to convict him because he was able to give details that only the murderer would know. But he says that Adachi is a model prisoner and won't be causing any problems anytime soon. In fact, they visit quite often. Nanako comes in and is excited to see us. She tells us that she's taking piano lessons, and we all sit and eat, and suddenly the weather comes on. We see a familiar face on TV. It looks like Marie, but under the guise of Mariko Kusumi. She starts talking about making it sunny. From what it sounds like, she can control the weather. She made it sunny just for our visit. When everyone tells us, she's become somewhat of a local celebrity. We continue to talk and enjoy our time together. Dojima says Nanako has something to say.
Your
to us.
cooking is barely food, Chie.
Hey, shut up! What about mine?
Let's call him, Yosuke.
I could have made something too.
Please don't.
What was that? I can cook if I put my mind to it. So can I. That's...
Gotcha. Got it?
Oh yeah.
Well then. 1 and...
It's good to see you, senpai.
Kanji, it was welcome back. How could you mess that up?
Hey, just shut up, all right? I just got stage fright, that's
Well,
all.
I figured someone would blow it.
After the 2 long years that we knew each other, we made it through thick and thin. We defeated Izanami and her fragments, overcame the fog, and Sho disappeared. But with the will of the few who refuse to give up, darkness shall never take over again. But what if the darkness isn't from a powerful being? Rather, it came from the hearts of men.